Hey beauties! I'm Meghan Norean, your resident womb witch and cyclical guide. I invite you on a journey with me through the landscape of cycle awareness, social justice, and spirituality as we follow the embodied path of womb, earth, and moon. Welcome to Lunarscape. I am really excited to announce that today's podcast is sponsored by Cyclementary. This is an online group immersion course that is 6 weeks, and it will take you back to the basics to reclaim your menstrual cycle as your source of power and wisdom. This is the course that I wish I would have had when I was reaching my first bleed. All of the information on the physical, the emotional, and the spiritual bodies contained in the menstrual cycle. This is an invitation to come back home to your body and to yourself through the lens of the menstrual cycle. You can find more information about the course on meghannorean.com/cyclementary. There is a link in the description below. Let's start off by getting into our cycle news for today. As I was researching what news story to bring to you today, there was one that was much more prominent than the others in all of my searches, and that was the story about Pantone, the color company, creating this new color which they called Period. They worked with a menstrual product company called Intima, and there have been a few critiques around this story, which I will share with you. But first, I want to say that, it's just showing how much that menstruation is becoming more mainstream and more people are talking about it, that a company like Pantone has decided to create a color. So that is something to cheer and, be thankful for before we move into sort of the critiques that come along with this story. So one critique I have seen is that Intima as a company, they are not very inclusive of differing genders that menstruate in their marketing and the way they talk about their products. And so it was a little bit of a letdown that Pantone decided to work with them to create this, and some were wishing to see a more inclusive brand being a part of this story. Even though Pantone itself has said that when they described their color Period, they did use the word menstruator instead of genderizing the period color. Now, some of the other critiques I have been reading, and if you have not already seen the color Period, I recommend you go and look it up. And I am just wondering if anybody who has actually had a menstrual, bleed in their life created this color, because I have never seen menstrual blood coming out of my body that is the color of Period. So I'm interested to know if anybody else has, but I do not believe that it is a real color that is going to show the very differing shades of periods and bleeding, and I don't think that it is very inclusive of people who struggle with different types of menstrual problems like endometriosis or fibroids, PCOS. There doesn't seem to be a conversation around that. So while it seems they might be, bringing periods to the conversation, it doesn't seem like they're very inclusive of all of the shades of periods and all of the stories that come along with menstruation, and they seem to just be telling one story that doesn't even seem to be that accurate. So great job for, being such a large company and bringing in the word period and starting to talk about menstruation, but we need to keep, pushing further and realizing that there's a lot more nuance and a lot more representation that can go into the story about how people are bleeding, how menstruators experience their period. So yeah, I'd love to hear your thoughts of what you thought of. Oh, and the other thing I forgot to mention was that in the picture, when they revealed their color period, they showed a picture of a womb with the uterus, the fallopian tubes, the ovaries, and a picture of a menstrual cup. Only the menstrual cup in the picture was actually inside of the uterus. So that in itself could be very misleading for people that don't understand how menstrual cups work, or their whole platform is talking about using this color to stop the shame and the stigma around menstruation, but I don't think they've done a very good job at representing it authentically to be able to do that. And also, creating a color might be a wonderful thing to do to keep periods in the conversation, but tackling shame and stigma is going to come from a much deeper place that people have to work on, their psychological, emotional upbringing, stories they heard, beliefs, cultures. I mean, there's so much that needs to go into that just having a color named period is not going to tackle. So a step in some direction and getting the menstruation conversation to maybe a larger population, but we can do better than that. And I hope to see, things being more inclusive in the future. All right, so let's get into today's episode. It's taken me a little bit to record this episode because, well, the big news is that I moved from the States back to India to be with my partner. And then we also moved houses once I came back. So we've just been settling into the new place. And I've actually been finding it hard to find a good time to record because there always seems to be noise around. So just saying, in this episode or in future episodes, there might be some background noise that I can't avoid, whether it is the street dogs or horns honking or neighbors talking or whatever. Right now I am recording at 12:30 a.m. so hopefully there won't be any sounds happening at the moment. Yeah, let's talk about my cycle check-in. I am currently day 23 in my cycle. I am in my inner autumn, and I've had a rough 2 or 3 days. Felt really emotional, and I got really angsty and had some rage flowing. And just today I started feeling more at ease and a little more focused on what are the things that I need to do here at the end of my cycle, so that I can create a spacious restfulness for my bleed coming up. So it's been a pretty good day today. All right, so let's finally actually get into the episode now. Today we are talking about what is cyclical living. Yeah, so this is a concept that I probably would not have understood outside of my own menstrual cycle and coming into the work of menstrual cycle awareness. But now that I know it, I cannot imagine living outside of my cycle. So I just wanted to go through, let's go over the what, what is it? So if we think of this cosmic realm that we are in, this universe that we find ourselves, we see all through the universe that there are cycles. The main overarching cycle around everything is that there is life, there is death, and there is rebirth. And we see that, woven through all of the living things. And even within the human condition, that is the overriding cycle, life, death, rebirth. And then we can break it down to look at different rhythms and cycles that flow into that. And we can look at the circadian rhythm, the way that our body works with day and night. We can look at that cycle of the moon and the cycle of the sun, creating the day and night. And then obviously the lunar cycle, moving from the dark moon, up to the full moon, then back to the dark moon again. And we also look at the seasons of the earth, of the plants. We see moving through the seasons of rest for the ground, for the soil, a time of planting and growing and that budding of the plants. Then there is the full blossoming, and then there is the harvesting, there is the composting back down into, again, the rest time. And so if we look at all of these cycles, we start to realize that those of us with a womb also have that cycle, encoded within our womb, within our menstrual cycle. And the more we begin to work with our menstrual cycle, the more we start to see those patterns of life, death, and rebirth within our body. So before I learned about cyclical living, I thought my body in my womb had two states of being. I was either on my period or I was not on my period. So when I was on my period, usually I had a really terrible period pain, and I really couldn't do much for 2 or 3 days. And so that was sort of my time of rest, even though, I still tried to do things during those days. And then everything during the rest of my cycle, I treated as the same. I was not aware to any ebbs and flows in my cycle. I was just trying to fit into the society that was working in a linear model. And it didn't help that then for 14 years I was on the birth control pill, which, inhibited my ovulation and actually made my hormones to mimic a linear energy. And so then I was pretty much the same every day. And even on when I was having my period, I didn't notice much of a difference because it took away the pain, and I still, went to school. Went to work, like whatever it was, I was still treating my body the same every single day. And so it wasn't until actually I would have been 29 and decided to finally come off the pill because I was following a more holistic, natural way of living, trying to take care of my body with more herbal medicines instead of pharmaceuticals, and decided the pill just didn't fit in my lifestyle anymore. At the same time, I was starting a business here in India, making reusable cloth pads. So I started working with my menstrual cycle and learning from it, using these cloth pads, becoming intimate and knowing my blood. And so I owe a lot of my cyclical awareness to wearing reusable cloth pads, which I recommend for anybody that has not tried them yet. So the idea then of cyclical living is to align your life to a cycle. Now, if you have a menstrual cycle, you can align your life to the different phases or the seasons of the menstrual cycle. If you don't have a menstrual cycle, you can align your life to the moon cycle. You can align your life to the earth cycle and the seasons. Or you can do a combination of all three, which is what I try to do in my own life. So cyclical living is possible to connect and align with our menstrual cycle by practicing menstrual cycle awareness. And this is becoming aware on an embodied level, what day you are in your cycle and exploring your physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual landscapes of any given day. So, like what I shared at the beginning of the podcast, that I was on day 23 and this is how I was feeling, that is menstrual cycle awareness practice. And the more that you practice this every day, if you can, then the more information, the more awareness, the more consciousness that you are gaining about your cycle. And the beautiful thing is starting to see the patterns. When you begin to see the patterns in your cycle, then you are able to meet yourself, in those days of difficulty. You can meet yourself with grace and create self-care practices that would be nourishing for you. So, like for myself, I know I have a very difficult day at 25 usually, which will be coming up in 2 days. So I am very aware of that right now, and I'm planning to give myself lots of spaciousness and gentleness on my day 25. And then there's other days, where you feel great. I know I feel great on day 3, and I receive like lots of visions and dreamings about what my life holds in the future. And so I make sure that I create space for that dreaming and that visioning on day 3. So that's just a little idea of what life could look like by aligning to the menstrual cycle. I love, connecting all of these cycles together. So I'll just explain a little bit about all of the correlations, and then I'll create a podcast later in the future going into more detail about these. So I like to talk about the menstrual cycle in the 4 seasons format. So starting with winter, the inner winter is your time of bleeding, the time of menstruation. It would be the days approximately, if you have a 28-day cycle, about day 28 to day 5. Then it moves into the inner spring, which is the pre-ovulation phase. That would be days 6 to 12. Then the inner summer, which is the ovulation time, and that would be days 13 to 19. And then the inner autumn, which is the premenstrual phase, days 20 to 27. And these also line up with the moon cycle. The inner winter would be the new moon. The inner spring would be the waxing moon. Then it is the summer is the full moon, and then autumn is the waning moon. Now, even though I give you these days, they are, approximate, and usually my summer is a lot shorter than that, and my autumn is a lot longer than that. And, a lot of times I don't have a cycle that is 28 days, and it goes on for longer, and I've had a few that are shorter. And so the idea with practicing menstrual cycle awareness is finding your own unique rhythms and where the seasons within your own cycle lie, and then you can begin to sync your life and align your life to your own unique cycle and have your body informing the way you live your life. And that is the main idea behind cyclical living. So you might be wondering, why? Yeah, why should we practice cyclical living? Why does it really matter? Why can't we just keep living the way that we are living now? And if we look at the system we are in, the society we are in, it is very linear. It is not built on a hormone cycle of somebody who has a womb, who, has fluctuating hormones of estrogen and progesterone throughout the cycle. It's built for a linear hormonal cycle that people without wombs usually have. So it's this very linear structure, and the society, when it's linear, there's always a point in the future that we're working towards. And there is this drive and this push to always go, go, go so that you can try and reach and obtain that future goal out there somewhere. But because of the system and because of things like capitalism, that it becomes almost impossible to ever reach that goal, because when you get close, the goal goes out even further. And so the idea of why we would practice cyclical living is to get out of that rat race of the constant push to do and produce, and to really honor the wisdom in resting in silence and being still, and having that be the time to actually connect with the deeper, the divine essence of your, sacredness of who you are and what is within you, and how you are connected to everything and all that is sacred. And realizing that the cosmos has this cycle, and the earth has this cycle, and the moon has this cycle, and the bodies with wombs has this cycle. And so when we are living in a linear framework, then we are actually working against all of those cycles and not with them, and all of the wisdom that they have for helping us to not be in a state of chronic stress all the time, and helping us to not burn out. Because when we can live in a cyclical way of life, then we realize that the chronic stress that we are feeling is because of this constant pushing and doing, and we're not giving ourselves the time to rest and reload. And and then realizing that the traumas that we have carried on, when you are constantly being pushed to go and do, you don't have any time to process or integrate any sort of trauma healing that you may be trying to work through. And so living cyclically allows all of those things their time and their place in the cycle. So that is the thing. There is a time and a place within the cycle. During your bleed, during the inner winter, that is the time to rest, to recoup. Our hormones are at our lowest at that time. So it is just a natural state of restfulness and a state of being and not doing. And then, we move into the spring, and that's a time of playfulness and curiosity. And if you look at the plants, that are just popping their heads above the soil in their spring, just kind of seeing, oh, what's out there, and starting to turn their leaves and their face towards the sun. And then, coming into the summer, the fullness of what you were meant to do and be here in this world. And, that is the time of doing and saying yes, and being productive and getting the energy out into the world. And then coming into the inner autumn is that time of composting and harvesting, and spending time being thankful, and spending time at looking back and editing and getting feedback on your work or your life. And then leading right back into, again, the inner winter and the time to rest and dream again about what the next cycle may be. So the things we are working against this society that tells us that rest is lazy, that emotions are weak. Have you ever heard anybody say, oh, you're just so hormonal, or you're just being hormonal right now? Yeah, that's really because our hormones don't fit into this system that has been set up for the dominant society. And then these are all leading into things like period pain being normalized. Like, everybody thinks, oh, that's just a part of having a menstrual cycle, is having pain every time I bleed. Well, I want to tell you right now that yes, period pain is common, but it is not normal. You can live a life free of period pain, and maybe you'll have it sometimes and maybe you won't. But it is possible, to live without period pain, and that shouldn't be something that is normalized. And then the menstrual cycle, even though that it has been said it is a vital sign of our health, can be just as important as our heartbeat, as our breathing. It is a direct reflection of how our health is doing. We can tell by the way our blood looks, by the way our pain is feeling, by our emotions throughout our cycle. We can understand what's going on with our health, and we have these signs that show us where to look deeper into our cycle and underneath all that to find the root causes of what may be going on in our body. So by practicing cyclical living, we are rewriting that story. We are rewriting the story that says that our menstrual cycle is as important as breathing and our heartbeat, because it is a foundation to who we are as beings, and it is that important reflection of our health and well-being. The more we step into this way of living cyclically, the more the revolution begins. We are building a cyclical revolution. We are building these ways of being that will shift the dominant society, shift the old paradigm, and working towards, a future where every body every body that exists on this earth can live according to their own unique rhythms, whether that is linear, if they have a linear structure within their body, or whether it is cyclical, and how different every cycle can look. We are, opening up that conversation so that we can be inclusive to all bodies and how they experience their cyclicalness or their linearness, and how they can show up in the world. And right now, the cyclical body is not in the conversation, and so that's what I'm trying to do here, bringing in this awareness of how we can live aligned with our cycles and how we can rewrite that story for our cyclical revolution. So I hope that you are with me in this. And if you are wanting to be a part of this cyclical revolution and you want to learn more about your own unique cycle, then you can get ready to join my course, Cyclementary, which is coming up on November 8th. And you could find the description for it and the link below. Hopefully, I will have you all come back next time, where we will be discussing Samhain, the pagan holiday that is on the same day as Halloween. And we'll talk a little bit more about the Wheel of the Year and the festivals that flow throughout the cycle of the Earth. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Lunarscape.